Last week, I started to talk about the series of assignments around drafting your own original short story. And we talked about the planning fiction worksheet last week. And you may have already submitted this, and that's fine. But we're just going to talk about the next step. And a lot of students have missed this step, and that is drafting your own story. So we're going to look at that, and then we'll get into the masterpiece sentences portion of this assignment series. So I'm going to share my screen. And this is where we got to last time, which is drafting the story itself. So once you have done the planning fiction worksheet, you've basically created a graphic organizer of your short story. And the next step, which many students, as I said, missed, is drafting the story itself. And sometimes students say that they have trouble coming up with an idea for a story. And what I would suggest to you is that you think of some sort of conflict that you've experienced in your own life and basing your story upon that. So that's what I would suggest. I mean, it could be as something as small as, um, you know, you missed the bus in the morning. I guess you guys don't take the bus if you're on virtual school, but um, let's say you're in the city and you were forced to take public transportation, um, and you missed the bus, and then how you resolved that conflict. It doesn't have to be this very super creative, fantastical thing. It can just be some sort of trial that you faced in your own life, and you can base your story upon that. And there's certain things about a short story. There's a basic structure. Like if you think about a song, for instance, songs usually are verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, right? That's the basic formula for a song. And stories are similar. So we're going to look at the basic structure of a short story. And I have a short little video to share with you. And let me pull that up. While I pull that up, does anybody have any questions about what I just talked about, like coming up with an idea? If you have any ideas that you want to run by me, this would be a good time for that. No? Okay. So let me share this video with you, and this will tell you the basic structure and formula of a short story.
At Nemours Children's Health, you're more than a patient. We've laughed and...
There are 5 basic elements that make up a story. Plot is one of those 5 basic elements. The plot is a term for the main events in the story. The main events happen in a certain order, and so the plot is sometimes also referred to as the storyline. Looking at it more closely, the plot can be further broken down into 5 parts. It's helpful to imagine those 5 parts as a roller coaster ride. The first part of the plot is called the exposition. The exposition is simply the beginning of the story. Here, the author introduces the characters and establishes the setting. The next part is the rising action. This is where the conflict of the story is revealed. During the rising action, the main character encounters some sort of problem that creates tension, such as when the wolf blows down the little pig's house. The climax is the next part of the plot. It is the most exciting part of the story and the point where there is a change in the direction of the story and its course of events. In The Three Little Pigs, this would be when the wolf gets frustrated and tries to enter the brick house through the chimney. The next part is the falling action. It occurs right after the climax. The tension from the conflict starts to decrease and the story events wind down or settle toward an end. The falling action in The Three Little Pigs is when the wolf lands in the hot soup pot and gets burned. The last part of the plot is the resolution. Here, the problem of the story is solved and the story ends. In The Three Little Pigs, this is when the wolf runs away and disappears into the forest.
Created using Powtoon.
Okay. So that
Let's
was
talk about the elements of a
sorry.
story. Character setting, plot, and
So that was, I feel, was a pretty straightforward, effective guideline for kind of identifying the different parts of a story. I also have something I'm going to share with you that is a visual aid here. And this is, again, a visual representation of the elements of a story. So, again, we have the plot, which is, what is happening and why, the storyline, which is sort of encompasses all of the different parts. And then the conflict is introduced in the very beginning to hook your readers. And you want to decide whether you want to focus on an internal or an external conflict. And those are a couple of terms we went over last week. But an internal conflict would be, if I use the example earlier of missing the bus, the internal conflict could be within the character and their struggle with being on time and kind of beating themselves up over being on time. That would be an internal conflict. Or you could focus it more on external conflict, like perhaps the character got delayed for something by something on their way to the bus, and that delay is an external conflict. Then you see the rising action, which is basically the exposition of the story leading up to the climax, the point of no return. And the rising action could also include character descriptions, setting, which is the time and place of the story. You would kind of introduce the mood of the story, which is the overall feeling. We listened to an Edgar Allan Poe story last week, and the mood of that story was sort of dark and foreboding and creepy, okay? You also need to decide what point of view you're going to write in, and the point of view can be in the first person, I, the third person omniscient, which is using the pronouns he, she, they, but it's when the author is sort of expressing the point of view of all the characters, not just one. Whereas in third person limited, the author is only describing the point of view of one character. So that's why it's limited. But you decide whether you want to use I or he, she, they, all within the exposition portion of the story. The climax is the point of no return. So if we use that example of missing the bus, it would be the character is left at the bus station without a ride and having to deal with the reality of not having a ride. The falling action could be what the character decides to do, and the resolution would be the character figuring out an alternate route for themselves. So you can see, if you're trying to draft a short story, using something like this to help you along with that planning fiction worksheet, the story should really be not too hard to write, because you'll have all the decisions made for yourself, and you're basically just tying all these different components together and storytelling. Before I get into some more terms from these lessons, I just want to ask, does anybody have any questions so far regarding what we just learned about? Is this helping you to feel more confident in writing a short story? It is. Okay, great. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to look at a couple of terms that are from directly from your lesson, so that we're sure that you know what all of these terms mean, and not coincidentally, they relate to story composition. So the first term is engage. So you're trying to capture a reader's attention with the conflict. You want to introduce it early so you kind of have a hook to get someone interested. With the example of missing the bus, you could even start with that. I missed the bus. That could be the very first sentence. And if we were thinking about some decisions that we've made about this story, if I say I missed the bus, I'm deciding that the story is going to be written in first person point of view. So the mechanism in which authors do this is by creating compelling conflicts, relatable characters, suspenseful plots, and vivid descriptions. The vivid descriptions we're going to get into a little bit later, but in this series of assignments, there are revisions required, and it's all about creating vivid descriptions with these revisions that they're asking you to do. And the result is an engaging story that makes the reader feel invested. So that's engage. Next we have orient. So you're giving some context here, and you're establishing the setting, the time and place. You're introducing the main characters and providing the initial context for the story. When you're orienting your readers, you're doing this. This is